Welcome back to Doc Chat. I'm Adnan Wase from POV. We're talking today for the hour about The Genius of Marian, which aired last night on PBS stations. And as you can already see from all the heads below, we have a number of amazing guests to talk with us today about the film, but also about the changing challenges of caregiving in America. And so I'd like to introduce the group first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the film and get started with your questions. So first of all, we have Banker White and Anna Fitch. They are husband and wife, and also the filmmakers. And of course, Banker, if you've seen the film, is the son of the main subject of the film. So thank you for both of you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
And Anna and Banker are both longtime filmmakers. Banker, you may also remember, if you're a POV fan, was the filmmaker of Sierra Leone's Refugee All-Stars, which aired on POV a few years ago. We also have with us Ed White. Ed White is, as he's described himself, Pam's husband. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. So, husband of Pam and father of Banker. And then we also have Susan Rowlett. Susan is manager of care, consultation, and clinical education at the Massachusetts, New Hampshire chapter of Alzheimer's Association, and she's also a licensed social worker. Thank you, Susan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we also have Bruce Miller, who's the director of the UC San Francisco Memory and Aging Center. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Miller, as well.
Thank you.
So I want to get started for people who've not yet seen the film. Maybe Banker and Anna, you could just tell us, for those people, if you could just describe the film for our audience and what it's about.
Yeah, it's a very intimate look at what our family went through for a little more than 3 years, from right after my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease until we stopped shooting in the end of 2012, began in late 2009. And the title of the film is actually a title of a book that my mom kind of announced to the family that she wanted to write. She, about a year before her diagnosis, started working on a book called The Genius of Marian, which was about my grandmother, Marian Steele, who also had Alzheimer's disease. And I think that the intention, my mom had never written a book before, but the intention behind wanting to do this was both to tribute this, amazing, she was a very talented artist, from my perspective, a magical grandmother. And so she wanted to kind of honor this person. This is now 6 years after Marian passed. That was in 2001. And at the same time, write about what it was like to transition from being a daughter to caring for Marian, and then ultimately making the decision to place her in a home for the last couple years of her life. And we, I think, know now that that curiosity, though this was before my mom's diagnosis, was probably because she felt changes that were going on in herself. And I was very close with Marian. So I was involved with that project well before it became the documentary that we aired last night. And so when I moved back in 2009, right after my mom's diagnosis, sitting with her and talking about Marian, and then eventually talking very directly with my mom about what it felt like to be going through this Alzheimer's experience herself. That's kind of how the project started. And I would say the idea that it was our point of departure, I think the spirit of my mom's book project is something that I took on, which is wanting both to make a film that was very honest about what this has felt like for us as a family, to transition into a caregiving role, for me and my two siblings, for my father especially, but to still hold on to the spirit of my mom's book project, which is to kind of tribute this person that you love so much. And so, it was very much a kind of a film that celebrated what an incredible person I think my mother is, which is what anyone does in this disease process. It lasts for a long time, so you're forced to deal with logistical changes, and at the same time, I think, given an opportunity to think about what your life has been like together, if you can find the space for it.
Thanks, Banker. That just, I'm bringing up, I just want to read a comment actually, and I'll go to a question for Ed. This is a comment from Becca, who left this comment on Facebook, and I'll read the whole comment actually for you. It says, it's such a wonderful idea to film her accounts of stories of the past, for one day they will be gone. That is one mistake we made with my grandma. We didn't record those memories. She was diagnosed over a decade ago, and she's gotten to the final stage of Alzheimer's. It would be nice to get some guidance on how to interact with her. I speak with her normally, but after some time of that, I'm out of anecdotes to share and find myself at a loss. And actually, I'm not sure if something has come to you, Banker, just in terms of how you film family, because it seems like it's something that more and more people have been asking. So we've got a couple comments like this about how do I do this for my family. And maybe I'll go to you, Banker and Anna first, and then I want to talk to you, Ed, about the same question.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be great to segue to my dad, because I'm a fine artist. I feel like I got that from Marian, but my dad was an incredible shutterbug. My whole childhood, he filmed everything, both with still pictures and originally Super 8 into VHS, and so I think the act of kind of like filming family moments in a way that, it's not everyone does this, but I think that we did it quite a bit, and so to have a camera move into a space to create a documentary, I think it felt very normal for most of the scenes. It felt very normal to have a camera out, I have a very playful relationship with my mother too, so to have a camera there recording what we were talking about is something that I had done prior to making the film. And I think because she really wanted to remember this incredible woman, it really did start as this, I felt very much like a family archivist. And with the material that we collected, there's so much more than these 80 minutes that I'll cherish forever. And Anna's going to say something also.
And I would chime in and say that, it's unique to be a filmmaker in this situation, but I think the advice that I would give other people who are wondering how to do this is to just do it. Tell your parent you want to do an interview with them, write down 5 questions and do it on your video-enabled iPhone. It doesn't matter, that's going to be precious, and it's going to be, you're going to talk about things that you don't talk about over dinner or on other visits when you do it that way. Or have them pull out a box of family photos and see what they can tell you about them and film that process, and that kind of takes the pressure off and makes it a little less formal. But just to have your parents' voice after they're gone, it doesn't matter if it's recorded on professional audio gear or on an answering machine message, but to just do it.
Thanks, Anna. So, Ed, I think the question was really more meant for you. I mean, you're the proto-filmmaker here. I'm sure Banker learned everything from you. What have you learned from this process? And maybe you've got something to share to Becca on Facebook about what you've learned from documenting Pam and your family.
Well, it's nice that people think that, but of course Banker's capabilities are way beyond what I was ever able to do. I inherited from my father, who collected cameras as well as took a lot of pictures. And also, to the comment that was made, I hope that with all the digital ability that we all have to record images and videos and pictures, that it will be easier for families to record memories. I just moved into a house that has a dark room, and I laughed. It could turn into a wine cellar, because who needs a dark room anymore? But Anna is also right. Just do it. And I think showing anyone that you want to remember older pictures and ask them to talk to you about them is a terrific way to make it easy to do these recordings. I'll also say, since Banker told me he was doing something for the family and not making a film for PBS, it was a lot easier for me to go along with it. So you have to be sneaky.
Yeah. Actually, you've answered a question. We had a question about how did you agree to let your son do this, but I think you just answered that question.
Like Anna said, I didn't. It just happened.
So, Susan, I want to bring you into this conversation as well, because you actually know the family intimately, and you know Pam and you know Ed and the whites. But we have a question that's come in, actually a number of questions for you, but maybe one question you can answer is, the question is, what does it mean for family to go through their loved one's Alzheimer's? And I might even just ask for you to talk about, at the same time, the role that you've played in this family, what you have done specifically with Pam, and then also, these are many questions, but also how that is changing. So the way that you are dealing with the white family today, how that has changed, and how you might have dealt with the family 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Sure, thank you. I met Banker and Devin and Anna, I believe, back in 2009 to start with. And my role at the Alzheimer's Association is as a consultant to families to help them understand what's happened, help them to understand the diagnosis, what it means, what it's going to mean for their family, how they can better communicate and connect with the person who is diagnosed. So my primary role is with this family, particularly, has been with the family and not with Pam. So I've actually only been able to meet Pam once. So I have to say that when I first met the family in 2009, I think that was even before the film had really become a real film. So to see them come to this point, to be so public, and to see Pam, to have gotten to know her through this film, because I didn't have the opportunity to know her before. So I really worked with the family from the very beginning before, I think, and they can speak to what my role was with them at that point, but I remember that they were sort of coming in to say, what do we do? How do we help my parents? How do we help my dad? How do we help my mom and care for her in the best way possible? And obviously they've done a beautiful job. They've done an amazing job caring for her. One thing I want to say is, and I've met with Ed a couple of times as well, and meeting with people individually in our office is so different, I've been so impacted by seeing what happens after they leave my office via this film. The film has really given me such an idea of our efforts to educate and support families and how that translates into when they get home, and what that, what our support and information means for families after they leave our office. So it's just been it's been such a thrill for me to be a part of this with the family and see them go through this process. They've done a tremendous job. So how has it changed in general working for families over the past 10 years that I've been involved? Is that the other question?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that one of the things I always say when I'm speaking about this film in particular is that this family has enormous resources in a lot of different ways. It's a very strong, tight family, and they're able to have help and care in a lot of different ways. I think for what we're seeing more and more is families struggling to access care and support. There are a lot of people who live alone and don't have family with them, or families who are long distance and no one there to be a primary caregiver. That struggles with accessing medical care and accessing resources in the community and affording those resources. All of those things are huge challenges, and I think I see those more and more every year. I think the calls that we're getting at the Alzheimer's Association are certainly more complex situations than they've ever been before.
Yeah, and Susan, there are actually a number of questions that are coming up actually about a lot of things you said about resources that people have, and it's something that I want to get back to. But I want to ask Dr. Miller a question as well first, but I want to actually read a comment before I ask this question, and this comment is coming in from Diana over Facebook, and I'll read the whole comment first, and maybe this is for Dr. Miller first, but maybe some other people, maybe Susan even, you might have something to say. So the question, or the comment is from Diana: I so regret that we gave my parents those medications, just extended her suffering as well as ours. The choice between no medication, intense but short-lived, meds, still a low-grade painful distress in which the illness progresses glacially slow and their needs and they exhaust all resources. And then she says time, physical, and emotional energy and money. You move from caring for them out of love to caring for them simply out of moral obligation. So there's a lot of baggage in that question, but there is a question in there for Dr. Miller, just in terms of what you're seeing now in terms of treatment, because we know that if I can just say some things that we've not said that are sort of the obvious, that that Alzheimer's is a fatal disease and treatment is very difficult. So I feel kind of the pain in that comment of that. But maybe Dr. Miller, you could speak to sort of the treatment in terms of medication and beyond.
Yeah, I just want to reflect a second on the movie itself and how beautifully it dealt with what almost every family faces related to medications. And I think for Pamela, this is not something that she wanted to do. She was not a medication taker, and I think it was, in her mind, a bit of a threat to her independence. And yet, it seemed, and I think the family had an agreement that the medicines that she was given helped her and helped her day to day. The sad truth is we do not yet have very effective medicines for Alzheimer's disease. I think we have medicines that can treat some symptoms. Sometimes symptoms are very troubling to the patient and the family. Delusions, false beliefs, agitation, trouble with sleep, and we don't yet have that magic bullet that will go in and bring people back to normal. This is really the struggle of our scientific programs across the country, is how we can do better and help families with better medications than we have today.
Can you give us also, Dr. Miller, just some, if you've got them at the top of your head, some statistics? I know that I've got some that I can chime
Sure.
back at you if you don't have them, but can you just talk about prevalence of Alzheimer's, dementia, the relativity of those things? I know that there's, someone actually had commented, actually I'll read out this question, and maybe you can actually address it. This is from Lana. I don't remember what network she came in from, but her question is, part of her question is about early onset dementias, are they underreported? So maybe I'll just pause there, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more about the stats around that.
We think this is perhaps the most costly disease in the United States. A very important paper by Michael Hurd in the New England Journal talked about the costs. And a lot of these costs are borne by families. So I think Susan pointed out, unlike this almost perfect family that we saw on film, this is as good as it gets. And I think most families struggle intensely financially and in many other ways in terms of dealing with this. We think the diagnosis is really a tip of the iceberg. So for every individual diagnosed, there are probably 3 more in the process of getting a degenerative disease, and many people who go through their whole lifetime without a clear diagnosis. So I think this is just a huge, massive healthcare problem in the United States.
And then just follow.
Yeah, just 2 little statistics. So one, we think about 5 million people are affected at least with Alzheimer's disease, probably 3 times as many in the earlier stages, which we call MCI. And we think somebody dies from Alzheimer's disease about every 68 seconds in the United States. So this is a huge problem.
Now, I'm not so quick at my math, but I read the CDC reported pretty recently 85,000 deaths attributed per year, which would make it the number 6 killer. But then I'd also seen, following up on Lana's question about the underreportedness, is that people might die of other things, and the death isn't attributed to Alzheimer's. Can you speak to that?
Yes, we think on death certificates, Alzheimer's is underrepresented. So I think Alzheimer patients die of pneumonia in the late stages. It's the Alzheimer's that cause that pneumonia. So we think that this may be the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States.
Right, which would put it after heart disease and cancer, number 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on to other questions. Thank you, Dr. Miller. We have a question for Ed coming in from, I believe this is from Twitter. The question is, Ed, what are the best things your friends can do for you and Pam to help with this challenging situation?
Instead of asking, can we do anything? I'll use Anna's phrase, just do it. Don't even call, just come over. I think people knew for a number of years it was just me and Pam. And just having surprise visits, or just calling up and saying, I'm going to bring you dinner tomorrow night, or can I take Pam to a movie, or I'll be over tomorrow and take Pam for a walk, it's a beautiful day. I don't think people realize how immensely helpful those times are when someone else can be with Pam, and they're energizing for Pam as well.
Thanks, Ed. Another question coming in, I think this maybe is from Facebook. This question is for Anna and Banker. How would it's actually getting back to something that Susan, you had mentioned earlier about the resources and the costs of caretaking. So this question is for Banker, but I think it's potentially for many people, Ed and also Susan. The question is this: how would your family's experience be different if you didn't have the resources, financial time, etc.? What kinds of assistance have you relied on to take care of your mother? And maybe I'll go to Banker, to you first for that answer.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, my dad already started answering that in a way, because I think the hardest thing for anybody who's going through this is that the process asks so much of you, and it winds up being isolating because of the time commitment that is required, especially as the disease progresses. But then there's also something that makes Alzheimer's and related dementias unique when we're talking about some of these other diseases, in that there is an incredible stigma attached to it. And so I think it makes it very difficult for friends to know if it's appropriate to reach out, like what my dad is saying. And so, one of the things that I think is universal is that we leaned quite heavily. It wasn't until quite heavily on our friends to help out and the immediate family, and it wasn't until very late stages that we did bring someone into the home and paid for some in-home care, which has been wonderful, and I feel very lucky that has given my dad a bit of a break in his caregiving duties. But I think that the way that we relied on a network of support and community is something that I think would be, it's a funny way to answer the question, what would it be like if we didn't have the resources? I think we actually didn't use resources for a very long time in terms of financial. And I think what's universally true is that it is actually your support network, whether that's through your nuclear family or friends or neighbors or and I think that the most important thing goes back to what my dad was saying, is that I think even people who are willing to help don't know how, and I think that's because people don't talk enough about what this feels like. We actually launched a website in sync with the broadcast last night called The Genius of Caring at geniusofcaring.com, and the thing that motivated us to launch this project to begin with is to be able to try and create a platform and a safe space for people to be able to share their experiences related to what it feels like to be a caregiver. Because I think the most important thing is to ask for help if you need it, and for people to be able to find community somehow in this process that otherwise can be so isolating.
Yeah, I would agree with Banker. I mean, in short, you could have all the resources in the world, and if you don't feel comfortable asking for help, you don't get the help you need. Or you could have very little resources, but if you can find a way to connect with your community, whatever it is, friends, family, and ask for help, that's the best thing you could do. And I don't know if Susan wants to comment on this too, because it's probably, like she was saying, a question that they get a lot. What can you do if you don't have if family is far away, or you don't have family, or you don't have other financial resources to bring in help?
I think my biggest message to families is to not do this alone, and that might be informal resources, friends and family, neighbors, church, faith communities. People find a lot of strength and logistical support and emotional support by being able to reach out and talk about what's going on and ask for that help. And Ed, I think it's hard, reflecting on what you said, is that we want friends and family to just do it, but they do need permission, I think, to know that it's okay to offer. So I always encourage caregivers to, you have to ask, or at least once, or just let people know that I would really appreciate it if you could do this, bring a meal, or take my loved one for an afternoon, or have coffee, or whatever. Those are huge ways to help. There are a number of resources, though, and the Alzheimer's Association, I have to say I'm very proud to work for the association. We have a 24-hour helpline that is staffed by clinicians who are Alzheimer's experts that try to help families figure out these issues, exactly what we're talking about. Every individual family's resources are different, and we want to walk through each family's circumstance with them and try to help them come up with a plan to manage this disease, from what they need very early on through the course of the disease. So there's always help available, and I think you can't replace talking through with an expert some of these issues. I think it's very helpful.
All right, thanks, Susan. Many questions coming in. One more for the filmmakers. This is from Dorian from Google+. The question is, in the film, several of Pam's friends were interviewed and were shown as being very supportive of their friend's diagnosis. Were there other friends who dropped out of Pam's life because of the stigma of Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's been so interesting about working on this project is I can now answer this question, and some of this has come full circle, possibly because we moved from this period of secrecy to, real public advocacy, obviously. But when we were secretive and the first news of her diagnosis came out, and, my dad can comment to exactly what that felt like also. But I would say that it felt like at least half of their friends just were no longer present in their life. And it's one of those things because, pre-diagnosis, my mom's behavior was not what it used to be. And so some of this evolved through concern, people not really sure why my mother was acting differently, an active member of a book club, and things like bridge that actually, I think the dementia-related symptoms, things like that, where her impairment showed up very early. I think that there were a lot of friends that were confused, and yeah, like I said, my dad could speak to exactly what that felt like, but I would say maybe half of their friends or more just weren't sure what to do. So yeah, there wasn't any support there. But to explain what I mean by come full circle, I think that one of the things that we have seen as we were more vocal and open about what happened, and in fact, people seeing the film and potentially understanding what this actually looked like inside the house instead of, and I say this, there's a lot of love in the way they were gossiping, but I could say the type of gossip and conversation about what was happening with Pam, I think it's painful to see someone that you love changing. And for some people, a natural way to react to that is to transition into being a caregiver. And for other people who dearly, dearly love my mom and my parents, they just simply didn't know what to do. So there was no support and very little communication. And some of that has changed. I think my dad can speak to this again, that friends who maybe weren't as present have reached out a bit more. Some of that might be the public nature of how we're dealing with it, and some of it might just be that it takes time for people to understand what this disease is like. My mom is one of the first in their peer group to go through this, and so maybe the learning curve there took a little bit longer, and hopefully the learning curve for the communities in the country, as we experience more and more of this, hopefully there'll be a learning curve where where everyone starts to understand what this is like and figures out their own way to offer support.
Great. And Ed, can you just build on that answer?
Yeah. Well, it was heartbreaking when these events happened, and it still is. Pam was very active, as my son just said. Banker talked about her being a member of book groups. She was in bridge groups. She helped found a singing group. But it became more and more difficult for people in those activities to have Pam with them, and so they would ask me to try and, withdraw her from those. I'll also say that my loyalty will always be to Pam first, and she never wanted anyone to know about this diagnosis. This was a big secret. If anyone asked what's going on with Pam, she always said, just say she's fine. And of course I did that even though people knew I was lying to them. And it probably would have been better if that had changed and I had asked for help earlier, but then I wouldn't have felt the same about my loyalty to Pam. So yeah, caregivers are going to be hooked on this dilemma. I suppose it's better to have other people leak the information so that I didn't have to. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, we've got many more questions coming in. Next question is for Dr. Miller to change pace a little bit. I'll read the comment first and then get to the question. The comment is from Cindy on Google+. She says, my brother died at 62 from dementia with Lewy bodies. How different is this than Alzheimer's disease, and what is known about the genetic links for other disease?
Yeah, let me answer this a little broadly. So I think we're learning a lot about the genetics of all the degenerative diseases in the last few years in particular. And I think the dementia with Lewy bodies is a Parkinson-type degenerative disease with a lot of cognitive problems, hallucinations, fluctuation, and usually Parkinson-type motor problems. Early onset Alzheimer's disease, we think in about 50% of people there are known genes that predispose to this. A lot of people, though, we have no idea why they get, even at this very young age, Alzheimer's disease. This is a disease of aging, and the older we get, the more likely we are to get Alzheimer-type problems. In people over the age of 80, maybe 30% have Alzheimer-type problems. I think the other thing we've learned is that there are lots of links between Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's-like disease and Alzheimer's. And a lot of patients who start with Alzheimer's develop problems with movement that are Parkinson-like, and they show Parkinson proteins in the brain. And a lot of patients who begin with Parkinson's movement-type problems go on to develop Alzheimer-type pathology. So I think this is in some ways very hopeful, because we think if we could have a treatment for one disease, it might lead to treatments for other types of dementia.
Great, thank you, Dr. Miller. More questions coming in. Let's see what we have here. What's the questions? Okay, here's one for Susan, potentially. This is coming in from Facebook. It's more, it's less of a question, more of a statement, but maybe you can pull a question out of this. So this is a question from Brenda on Facebook, and she's responding to many people who were commenting on our Facebook page about saying, oh, this is such a sad story, and kind of leaving it at that. So her response to that was, so what are we going to do about it? Crying and saying so sad doesn't do anything. I'm a daughter of a woman with Alzheimer's, and I'm a mother. We work, we fight, and we learn all we can and continue to love these people in our lives. After all, it could be any one of us. Maybe, Susan, you could just speak to kind of what Brenda's getting at there, which is, people, even though people see that it runs in families, potentially it's still a shock to people. And what happens when someone is diagnosed and they come to see you? What is that first kind of conversation that you have with them?
If you could come back to me, because I would love to ask Banker to paraphrase what you said on the clip that was shown after the film last night, and you so beautifully articulated the importance of understanding that there is connection and that there's ability to really have a full relationship with the person. during the disease, because I think that was really important.
Yeah, I think that what she's saying is that what are we going to do? I think what we found as a family is one of the things that we can do is consider ourselves advocates. You know, we don't need to be. It's wonderful in some ways that families who are individuals who are celebrities are starting to come out after that they've been diagnosed and creating awareness. But everyone can do this. Anyone who's going through this, and I've found that there's a real community of people through, you know, social media who've gone through this, and the process has changed their lives. So many people I've met who are kind of like really identify as Alzheimer's advocates did this because of how the disease somehow affected their lives. And it doesn't mean you need to change what you do full time to be able to join in and help kind of raise awareness about the disease and also create understanding. I think to what you're talking about in that quote last night, and what was really important to me with this film is that we really honestly depicted what this felt like and did it in a way that showed people that there is also the potential for love and connection through the disease process. Because people say, you know, I don't want to go like that. And when people say like that, it is this kind of like catch-all phrase that it's talking about dementia. And when you say that when you're younger, I think what you don't realize is that they say now over 85, like 50% of the population over 85 is going through this. So it is quite likely that everyone is going to have this become a part of their life. So trying to figure out how to live through it, and because it will just simply become a reality for all of us. And so if you have had a moving, powerful experience, if your life is affected by this, if you can find the space to learn how to be an advocate, and I think that can happen in the smallest of ways that are still very meaningful.
I would just follow up and say that there's a lot of research about what families can do to get through this process with the best quality of life despite the disease. And the research is very clear, and it's what we try to do for families, and what we try to provide is to be as educated as you can about the disease so you understand the ways that the person is changing, why behaviors happen, and how you can best respond, how you can best reach the person and communicate with them around the disease or through the disease, and to avoid conflicts and frustrations, minimize anxiety and frustrations as much as you can. There are techniques, communication techniques and symptom management strategies that I think are a lot of what this family has done, the White family, through the communication, through making this film together, just the family sharing together and in keeping Pam involved in all the family's activities. There's a million ways that families can learn to deal with it. I think when it first happens to you, it's so confusing and so confounding, and it's really impossible to even accept what's going on, much less know how to begin to deal with it. So I just encourage people to get help again, to start to learn about. You can learn. There's a tremendous amount of information online. The Alzheimer's Association website has just a wide range of information on all kinds of issues of communication, but also difficult behaviors that a lot of people are dealing with. Driving, safety, wandering, all of those things. How do you deal with it? So there's learning online. There's a lot of literature. There are people to talk to at the Alzheimer's Association, and their doctor's office and social workers in the community. Again, I just encourage people to not do this alone, because it doesn't make any sense when it first happens to you. It just doesn't. It takes a long time to even figure out what's happening. The diagnosis often takes a while to even figure out what's going on. So getting us help and being as educated as early as possible will help people have a better quality of life throughout the journey.
All right, thank you, Susan. Also, a number of the things you mentioned are linked from our website, and we'll make sure that those links are below this chat window for everyone who's with us. This is a question for the Banker family from Lana on Google+. Have you dealt with caregiver resentment? If so, how did you cope and overcome these feelings of wanting it all to just end already? And maybe this, if I can ask you, Ed, maybe to address this question a little bit.
Yeah. So after a few years of trying to be the sole caregiver, we did have people come in for a morning or 2 mornings a week, and it did not always work. Pam, as I used to put it, she's still at her fastball, and if she didn't like what people were doing with her, he would make sure that I knew, and we would change the caregivers. I would say still today, even though Pam has changed so much even since the movie and her capabilities, she still is not always happy having someone other than her family. She still, knows who her family is and who is not her family, and she can be tough about that. And so I have to keep reassuring her and make sure she understands that whoever is with her is doing it because they really want to help her and she really needs them. We've been lucky, though. Most of the caregivers, you saw one in the movie, Claire, who unfortunately has decided to go on to nursing school, which is really a shame because Pam loved her and we loved having her in our family. It's just important to keep reassuring the person with Alzheimer's that whoever is there for their best interest.
All right, thanks, Ed. A question for you, Dr. Miller. It's actually relates to something that you said. There are a couple of questions that I've got here, and I'll ask another kind of follow-up myself. You said that many people don't think Alzheimer's is medically important. Can you tell us a little bit about why? And maybe if you can kind of speak to people who are not you, why is it you think that people don't think it's as important as an issue as we're laying it out to be today?
I think that the research into Alzheimer's disease is relatively new. So with cancer, for example, there was already a war on cancer in the early 1970s. And I think we just began to understand that Alzheimer's disease was something more than just aging in the mid-1980s. So I think that we're just catching up with other diseases. I think our advocates have not been quite as strong and loud as some other diseases, and I think one of the reasons is if you have Alzheimer's disease, it's pretty hard for you to advocate. The cognitive issues, make it much less likely. So we depend on families. So the research dollars at the NIH are far less for Alzheimer's disease than many of the other major degenerative disorders. And then I think this movie really beautifully touches on, has this conversation on the issue of stigma. And so I think that it's still very hard for many people, and I totally understand this, to talk about this disease in public. So keeping it hidden, I think, makes it much harder for us to, rally people around getting research in this area. So I think these are a lot of the reasons for this.
Great, thank you, Dr. Miller. And we actually have a follow-up question that just came in. I think it just came in immediately after you started speaking, which is from Lawrence on Google+, and he said, Dr. Miller, if you said Parkinson's and Alzheimer's genes, If you said Parkinson's and Alzheimer's genes have been identified, doesn't this automatically predispose one to it genetically? If so, what significance is age? Thank you.
Yes. So I think the general trend has been the earlier the onset of the disease, the more likely we are to find a gene. So there are genes that cause Alzheimer's disease, 100% certainty. They often present in people in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and but younger. This is not the sort of family with that kind of gene. Then there are other genes that just predispose to Alzheimer's disease, but there seem to have to be other factors: lack of exercise, traumatic brain injury, cardiovascular risk factors. We think these are all potentially treatable risk factors that will diminish the likelihood that you will get Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. So I think there's really great hope in our field at the moment. We think that maybe we could diminish the likelihood that a third of the cases that we see ever occur if we could really go after these treatable risk factors that are associated with non-genetic causes of Alzheimer's disease.
All right, thank you, Dr. Miller. We've got time for 2 more questions, and we actually have them set already. So I just want to apologize to everyone else who we haven't been able to answer. Please keep that conversation going, and we'll try to forward those questions and try to at least get some kind of answer to your questions. But thank you, everyone, for your questions. This is a lot of a comment, but it'll become a question for Susan. And this is from Sarah on Google+. She says, I was struck with Pam's awareness of her situation. My husband does not seem to have that. Will he develop it? Is everyone different that way? And I guess there's more to a question, but I'll just leave it there. Susan, how do you deal with people who have sort of different levels of awareness? And answering Sarah's question directly, do people develop more of an awareness over time?
Unfortunately, not everyone has awareness. I think that is often one of the things that is impaired very early on for many people. And I think even for people who have some awareness of what's happening, they may know something, they don't feel right. There's, I'm forgetting things, and even if they're told they have Alzheimer's disease, they don't remember that. Or I think, Pam showed in the film that she was sometimes aware and sometimes not as aware. And even the moments when she was aware, I'm not sure that she fully understood what that meant for her. So I think if I can speak to the medication scene specifically, I think it's very interesting how I'm fascinated at how articulate she was in explaining why she did not want to take that medication. But it was clear to the family that that it was important, and explaining to her maybe what had led up to her needing that medication was not going to be helpful. She didn't really, it seemed to me she didn't remember why that medication had been prescribed. So it was this, she seemed very articulate and aware, while at the same time her lack of understanding and lack of insight was also there. So that's the biggest dilemma for families. It's something we talk to families about every day. And how do you help someone make changes that helps them to be more safe and improves their quality of life when they're presenting that way, when they are very articulate but not really fully understanding and able to make those decisions for themselves. It's a huge dilemma for families, a big part of what makes this so difficult.
Right, thank you, Susan. And a final question coming in from Google+, also from Sarah. I think we had another question from her. This is a question, and here it is. What does the White family think about genetic testing? Have they confronted this? And I'm going to ask Banker and Anna this question, and you'll tell me why I'm asking you. You know why I'm asking you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question, because there's been, for me personally, a bit of evolution, and for me, around what I thought about whether I would be tested. Some of that came through Anna actually signing up for 23andMe for a variety of reasons, but also because you were worried about prevalence of breast cancer and prostate cancer, and I wouldn't say that I was particularly fearful, but because there were no courses of treatment, I felt like there was no rush. And I also, for some reason, just feel like if it happens, it happens. I feel like I'm very much Marian's grandson, and no offense, Dad, my mother's son. And just in the way my mind works, in the way that when I talk, I hang on words in a certain way. I lose my train of thought. I've been losing keys my whole life, just like my wonderful mother and grandmother. So I feel like if it happens, it wouldn't surprise me. It's a very strange way to answer this question. But for some reason, I wasn't going to look into being tested. But the more I've learned about it and potentially how useful it might be to do that while simultaneously participating in drug trials, or I've become much more interested in having myself tested in that capacity. And I still haven't done it. And like I said, watching Anna go through the process and sitting with her and kind of like reading what we got back was interesting. So
it's also interesting that since then 23andMe is not allowed to give you all that medical information anymore. But and I think that's kind of at the heart of this debate. What are you doing with that information? How reliable is it? Mm-hmm. And I think all those questions come up around testing for Alzheimer's as well. I don't know if we have time to hear Dr. Miller speak to this.
Sure. Dr. Miller, if you have something to add.
Yeah, so we're a little bit ambivalent about genetic testing and disclosing results. The reason being is that we want to do no harm. And unlike breast cancer, ovarian cancer, where we have a very specific intervention that we can do, with most of the genetic risk factors, we don't really have an intervention that we can recommend to people. So we worry about giving bad news that will worry people and at the same time not having a therapy. The other side of this, though, is that I think we are, as a field, on the verge of having very exciting interventions. So I think we are now, thinking about very specific genes and interventions that we think over the next decade will really change the field entirely and offer much more hope to people who might be at risk for these disorders.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Miller, and we'll end on that hopeful note. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this very wide-ranging conversation. I really appreciate all of your time. Just some things that we discussed over the last hour. So the film is streaming. It's online on POV's site. If you're listening in the United States, you can actually watch the film now for the next month. The Genius of Caring, which Banker mentioned, will also add a link in this Google chat window, and it's also on the POV companion site for the Genius of Marian. The film is also CME accredited, so people in the medical field can actually watch this and get credits for watching, and information about that is also online. So we'll just make sure all of those links are present for everyone so they can connect back with the film. We're going to be returning in 2 weeks to Doc Chat. The next chat will be about Koch, so our film about Ed Koch, the quintessential New Yorker, former mayor of New York. We've got a film about him airing a week from Monday, and then we'll have a chat the Tuesday after. And the chat will be with Neil Barsky, who's the filmmaker and longtime journalist behind that film, and also Diane Coffey, who is Mayor Koch's former chief of staff. So that'll be an interesting conversation. So thank you again to everyone. Please stay connected with us online, keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
The best.